Great. So as I'm the first speaker, it's my honor and privilege to thank the organizer, namely Bénédicte Savoy, Charlotte Guichard, and Christine Hovald for the organization of this conference, where I'm very happy to participate. So I'm going to time myself. So my title has two parts, and my communication will have two parts as well. The first thing that will interest me is the fact that next to auction and next to shops, you have, since the 18th century, a strong informal market as well. And the two are certainly connected, but also kind of different. That's the first point I will demonstrate in my first part. And the second part is going to be more about how these objects, when they arrived in France or when they were exchanged, were not only had not only a monetary value but also a more symbolic value, in how it's also part of a process of translation. And I use translation because I will be interested in words and basically what were these people buying, or what did they think that they were buying. And this is of course much more speculative, but probably also interesting. So it has pardon. Ouais, ça. Oui. Presque. Okay, so you have a lot on one. Okay, we're good. Thank you. So just to remind you things that you've probably also heard yesterday, but since the 17th century, shops were, for instance, in Paris already selling ethnographic or non-Western objects, such as, for instance, the fans that you can see at the second part of the shops. It was still the case 100 years later, and I'm showing you a quite famous image, especially for 18th century specialists, but this is the commercial card of a famous dealer named Gersaint. You have his name here, and the card is based on a drawing made by the artist that Charlotte already mentioned, who's also a collector, François Boucher. I'm not going to enter too much in the details of the cards, but you can see a kind of accumulation of objects. So it's interesting also in terms of displays, where you have natural curiosities, natural objects such as shells, but also ware, like teapot, and more, let's say, artistic production, such as small sculptures that you can also see in the shop. Guillaume Glorieux is a French art historian who worked on Gersaint very much, and he said that around 1740, 1750, 60% of the shop stock was made of non-Western objects, so a big amount of big quantity of his stock, basically. And how did Gersaint get these objects? He had probably many ways to get them to Paris, but we know that since 1733 he went regularly to Holland, so which allows us to emphasize a second big center, that is Amsterdam, where he was going regularly, twice a year basically, and he bought things that came also from the Dutch East India Company at the time. So Holland was a way he had to get the material he was also selling. He bought there a lot of shells, but also really like ethnographic objects, and I'm going to just quote what he said is bringing back in 1734, and that is un très grand nombre de coquilles exquises et singulières, mais aussi des habillements et armes de sauvages. And that's going to be much more what I'm going to be interested in, but it's really something that goes together and that he could acquire there. Just one word about shells, because they are very much part of the interest in the 18th century and also of the collection of the stock of Gersaint. he sold many shells. But it's interesting for me to note that in his catalogue in 1736, is not only selling shells, but also explaining that he has to transform them. And as you have heard, I've been interested in restoration history. And I think that's an interesting part to notice, that he was explaining that he had to put into action some restoration practice in order to sell the thing that he was selling. So one point that is, in my mind at least, is that these objects came, but were also kind of treated in order to be sold. So we're not directly commercialized, and not only displayed, but also kind of restored. Let me just read the quotation with you. La coquille, après son transport, doit passer entre les mains de gens au fait pour la nettoyer, which also just like signified that there were kind of people who were dedicated to that activity. And second quote that is also interesting, I guess. Quelques naturalistes veulent les coquilles brutes, les curieux les veulent polies, afin d'en mieux percevoir toutes les beautés. So you also have different people having different expectations in terms of how things should look like, according to their own expertise and own interest. I'm not sure how it was done with, for instance, the Native American objects I'm interested in, but it certainly signifies that they have also been somehow repaired, or polished, or cleaned, at least transformed. That's the way a collection from this 18th century is currently redisplayed in La Rochelle. I just wanted to show you the shells, the way they are. It's supposed to be a kind of recreation of the real 18th century cabinet, but it's nevertheless useful to kind of see how it's done. And if you've read the quotation until the end with Gersaint, which I've not done, but is also like mentioning the beauty, and the cleaning process is supposed to make them look beautiful. And it even says something like, it's not loin d'en changer la nature, on la développe entièrement et on la met en état d'être observée. So that's, I think, very important and interesting. It's beautiful, and it's a treatment can make, not change the nature, but like give all the visibility to the nature, activate the potential, so to speak. So here you have it. As Charlotte also said, sale catalogs were a big part of the market. Here we have a sale catalog from Gersaint himself, from an important sale, the one of Monsieur Bonnier de la Mosson, so organized by Gersaint in 1744. The catalog is coming from the Getty, and it's interesting because you can see here all the prices, and as well as the name of the people who were buying at the time. Among the objects that are of interest for me today are, for instance, these arcs and carquois, so arrow, and carquois, I don't know how to translate it, but the thing to transport the arrow and bow, that were sold, among other things. And it's a strange thing, because in a way you have some interest of explaining the provenance in terms of geographical provenance, so you have Indian, Chinese, but in the other end it's not so precise neither. So people who were buying were the Duc de Chaume, that we already mentioned, Buffon, who's a very, very also important 18th century French naturalist, and Gersaint himself, so the dealer. And again, it's this story of buying, as he's also making his own stock while buying at his own sale. And probably, yeah, I'm sure it's still happening. I don't know much about that, but it's also a way to construct the provenance of the objects, and also to for him creating his stock. And you just have one page here, but he's buying a lot at his own sale. In terms of prices, just to give you an idea, this is around 20 and let's say 30 livres, which is not much, but not nothing neither. A porcelain, like a regular porcelain in the 18th century in such a sale would be about 6 livres, and a good one, an important, like pricey one, would be about 20 livres. So it's more than a porcelain, what you can have, but less than an important painting, of course. I'm not so good with this pointer. Ah, voilà. Just one other dealer that I would like just to emphasize, and that is important for at least people who are interested in 18th century France, is Lebrun. And he's buying for more money, actually. You have almost 100 livres, a bezoar de porc épic enchâssé dans de l'or. I don't want to go too much into that because it's certainly a natural curiosity more than an ethnographic object, but it's quite pricey and is more like an art dealer, but nevertheless buying this kind of strange things. So the collection I would like to discuss with you more precisely today is the one of Fayolle. I'm not sure about his first name, actually, so I'm going to give you the two options we have in the archives. One is Charles-Philippe Fayolle, and this is the option that the Quai Branly use when they are referring to the collection. And the other name we have is Denis-Jacques Fayolle, and that's the option that Christian Fist use when it's talking about this collection. You can choose the one you prefer. So it's in Versailles, but it's a private collection. So we might have thought, reading my title, that it would be about the king. Actually, the king is not so much involved, or at least not directly. So again, it's a private collection I will focus on, which is perhaps also interesting because we might know a little bit more about royal collections, royal Wunderkammer und so weiter, but less about what the private were doing at the time. A big thing to say about Fayolle is that he's working for the Navy, for the War Navy, French War Navy, and this is his profession that makes a big difference and that will allow him to get the objects he's wanting to have. Briefly about the life of the collection, it has been sold in 1786 to the Marquis de Serran, always in Versailles, and here you have his Hôtel Particulier, in 1786. And the Marquis de Serran is a teacher, the teacher for the royal family, basically, the royal kids. Here you have two gentlemen that were his pupil, and they were the two sons of Le Comte d'Artois, who's Louis' brother, actually. So very high kids, highly elevated socially kids. In terms of market, it's interesting because the collection has been sold. So we have a price, or at least we have an estimation. And that's also kind of fascinating because before selling it, they invite an expert to do the expertise and to estimate the entire collection. And we know that the estimation was about 30,000 livres, so quite a fair amount of money at the time. We even have the name of the expert, whose name is Gaillard and who came from Paris and who's a naturalist. Then, even if the collection was estimated that price, it doesn't mean that they have sold it that price because the power relationship between Le Marquis de Serran and Le Comte d'Artois and Fayolle was certainly let's say unstable. So after the revolution, Fayolle said that they didn't pay so much and that actually he didn't get anything and that he wants more money back. But that's the price. The collection has been at least estimated, which is already something, and also allows us to point out the difference between expertise and estimation and real price in the market. Then after the revolution, the collection has been sequestrated, if you want, and transported to the Palais de Versailles, where a lot of objects were actually gathered at the time. And then the collection is back in Fayolle's hand because he's appointed curator of his own collection. Yeah. This is when he's complaining about the fact that he didn't get actually the money he was promised to have. And finally, in 1806, the collection has been, so to speak, dismantled, and a part of it stayed in Versailles at the lycée and then at the bibliothèque. The ethnographic part has been, kept at the bibliothèque, but natural history collection went away to Paris. So, which is good is that we have two inventories. One is made when the collection has been taken away from the Marquis de Serran in 1792, that's the date, and the second inventory is 1806. We don't have prices on the inventory itself. We have descriptions that are both precise and kind of also difficult to interpret. Nevertheless, I tried to create a little map based on the inventory, which means that, of course, it's a map based on the way they describe the objects and certainly not a map based on the reality of the collection. But it doesn't matter. I suppose it's even more interesting to know that it's the way they perceived them, at least for me. A big part was unknown. It's a precise inventory, and because they really try to really detail what they have, but in the same time, yeah, you have some regions that are a little bit, let's say, interpreted or unprecise. Nevertheless, like a big part, I would say half, no, not half, but a third of the collection was, I've not been able to understand where they were coming from, and probably they were not sure neither. A big part, a second third is coming from the Americas, and that's very interesting and I think important. And this is why I will also focus on Native American objects later. And other provenance came from different parts of the globe, including what is today for us India, but what were at the time called the Indias. So how did he get all of this? Basically, and that's what I call informal market, he based himself on his own travel and his family. He had one son and 3 daughters. The 3 daughters all married marine people, so that was good for the collection. And mainly in the archives we have detailed exchange. Mainly his son and one of his son-in-law, Louis Malès, where we can also have his name, traveled. And when they traveled, they gathered things for daddy or daddy-in-law and sent them through boat, boxes full of stuff they could gather. And when I say stuff, it's ethnographic objects, but also like birds, shells, whatever they could have, and they thought it would please Fayol. And he's also a member of the Navy, appointed to the Bureau des Colonies, so he's in close contact with America and the Caribbean, and has been able to travel twice, as far as I know, maybe more, to Guadeloupe and to the United States. In the second part of the 18th century. So no surprise that his collection is also based on that kind of country. His son and son-in-law traveled a lot. His son-in-law is a member of the French East India Company, so big navy trade in France at the time. And through his own travels, he was able to collect the thing that is sent to his father. And it takes almost 1 year at each time, between the time they collected the thing and it arrived to Fayol. So it took a quite long time. So now the second part of the discussion for me is what was that? What were the objects as far as we can tell? And what did they think that was exactly? I will focus on 2 objects, 2 Native American objects, to discuss that with you. And I admit that it's a little bit more speculative, to say the less. And as a conclusion, I will take 1 more object and open a little bit the discussion. So the first object I would like to present you is currently at the Quai Branly. It's a sort of wampum belt, but it's not made of shells. It's wampum belts, just for memo, are made of shells. This one is made of glass. And it's interesting and important for different reasons, but I just wanted to refer to an article that you might have heard of by George Hamel, called Trade in Metaphor. And this is something that has been very important for me. It's an article of 1984, and is describing the trade of glass beads in the northeastern coast as a trade of metaphor. He said they didn't They didn't care about the glass themselves, but the glass acquired a very, very high value, and also the value of diamonds. And he has like a quotation from the 17th century, 18th century, saying that for Native American, and specifically for Iroquois, red glass beads were like diamonds. So there is this moment of translation from Europe to the United States, but I suppose there is also another moment of translation from the United States to Europe. So that's what I would like to wonder with you. What was that for him, and how did he acquire a metaphorical and also immaterial value and also significance? So that's just the shell. One has to say also that these were a very valuable collection item. The vempoon, it's something that you find quite a lot since the 17th century. It's the case here. So it's kind of a must in a collection. You have like here a vempoon that you can see at the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève. And it's so much so a must that Native American, and yet after that the Dutch, were producing vempoon for the trade in North America. So they were making not only like real vempoon, but also vempoon in small factories with glass and with shells for the market. Just another person who has one, and this is also another way to underline one important center after Amsterdam and Paris, it's London. Charlotte mentioned it already. It's also a big center, and somebody who's a painter, Benjamin West, had a collection and had a vempoon in his collection. And we also know that he didn't buy, he's born in the United States, but he didn't buy anything there. He bought everything in London. So this is also his own, is also probably part of this informal market, relying on his own private connections in order to construct his collection. Here you have his collection, and another piece of his collection that I showed because it's interesting in the sense that he will use it later in his own production all the time. Actually, this is the mocassin. Is using them actually to create pictures. So there is a very strong artistic practice in that case. Vempoon were also very important visually. They have been represented, and this is the case. You see it, of course, very much here. It's 1710. It's a painting made in England during an important moment where Iroquois chief, and this is a big question, Iroquois chief were visiting the Queen of England in the beginning of the 18th century. What we know now is that they were not really like kings, and they were probably not really habilitated from their tribe, but they were more like young Protestants who wanted to travel, and they were hired by the Queen in England to perform some kingship, and in order to show that the relationship between the new North America and England were getting stronger, and that the kings were visiting. It's a display of power, of course, and the French will do the same, because as I don't need to remind you, the colonial activities was very intense, and the fights between the French and the English were also very intense on the Iroquois region. So everybody wanted to show that the kings of the country were visiting. And were like pleased and were happy and had support, or were ready to give support. It always takes a lot of time. Voila, just another way the vempoon were used, and that's an interesting colonial piece. It's a kind of flag, if you want, made in Montreal, so in Canada, contemporary Canada, and you have use of real vempoon inside of the like material use of the vempoon, not only representation but really use of the beads themselves into this particular piece. That was produced in a convent, probably by missionaries, but also probably by Native Americans that were civilized at the convent and converted. So they also kind of I don't know if we have to call that beauty or value, but there were a very important interest on the visuality and materiality of the beads at the time, and that can also explain the interest that people like Fayol took in these particular objects. So I was trying to understand how they were perceived. If we say that there is an interest by collectors, it can be also interesting for painters because they can use it, and it's visually apparently interesting and curious to the people. And then I tried to understand more precisely what kind of words were used. If you read the inventory, the word is collier, necklace. This is the word that comes all the time, with no more precision. But I read another book a little bit earlier that is one of the very important travel records, New Voyage to North America. And then here you have a description of, it's very interesting also visually, but you have a description of an encounter between different population. And what is at the core of the image is this vampoon. And how is it described? It's called the Porcelain Collie. And I think that's a very interesting translation and kind of also metaphorical translation that they used this word porcelain. On the one side, it reminds us at the very old interest for shells and the connection that has always existed between shells and porcelain. But in the other hand, it's also a way to kind of give a name, use a name of another very important collection item, so to speak, that was porcelain at the time, and to translate it and somehow to make a comparison between the vampoon and a porcelain collier. The other object I wanted to discuss with you is this one. It's also now at the Quai Branly, and it comes up again in all the inventories that I've been able to consult. The two inventories I mentioned as a couronne. It's a couronne de sauvage. It's kind of in crown. It's interesting because other words could have been used. Bonnet, ornement, hairdresser. You have a lot of other words. But at the time, in 1792, the word couronne was the one that was all the time coming back. I have to show you how it was displayed, because it was displayed on a mannequins made of wax. This is the couronne. This is a skin, like multiple skin. We have this picture from the bibliothèque in Versailles, but it's an old display. We know that from the inventories. And here, I just wanted to show you the way it's described in the inventories. It's important because actually when you look, it's made on wax. It's a beautiful object, life casted on wax, and life casted during a second moment, when in 1725, other Iroquois chief came to Versailles to meet the king. It's another moment of diplomatic / manipulation exchange, where the king France wanted to show that it was really going well in North America, and that the Iroquois were strongly supporting him. We have like a lot of narrative about that. It's not so clear, but it seems to be less of a masquerade than the one I mentioned in England. So it seems to have been real power people from the Iroquois tribe coming to France, and there where they were casted. What I wanted to focus on, what I was surprised to discover, is that actually trading représentation d'un sauvage indien de grandeur naturelle orné d'un bonnet. Here you see, it's not the word crown, it's the word bonnet. We are again with the sale of Gersaint in 1744, and he's also selling in the same sale not only things, not only items, but also the way to display them. Mannequins that are completely part of the sale and that are certainly expensive, and even more expensive than some individual objects. You have the prices here and the whole. So you could buy the things, but you could also buy the way to display them, which were another kind of things of value. And in my interest, and I have to thank Yael Biro for that, because she sent me to the archives where I found this picture in Philadelphia. This is Umlauf, so we are 200 years later, almost. But Umlauf is a very important German from Hamburg dealer, and again is inscribing himself into this old tradition of the 18th century. And he's also selling artifacts, but also mannequins, so to speak, museum tools. He's also interested to sell that to museums, and somehow he's continuing this very long history of trade of objects displayed in mannequins that are also sold. So it's not, the discovery of North America was a big moment for Europe, and it's not surprising that they try to connect to a reality they knew better. This book from Lafitau is well known. It's of 1724, and Lafitau is comparing the Sauvage to the Greeks in the antiquity. I don't know what the crown was really about, but the kind of coming back of this power regalia word, and the fact that French people, for instance, were completely obsessed by the government of the Iroquois. We're not exactly able to understand it. I'm not a specialist, but the Iroquois society is, first of all, a matriarchal society, and then a confederal society, so there is no king. There is no emperor, although in the image I showed you with the Vempoon, you have empereur dissemination. So they really try to understand who's the chief, because we want to, diplomatic exchange should be done among chiefs. So I have the strong feeling that the couronne, the headdress has been acquired as a couronne and as a proof of this monarchy. And I would like to just show you how it was part of the discussion for somebody like Voltaire. I'm going to read it. Les peuples que l'on trouva dans le Canada n'étaient pas de la nature de ceux du Mexique, du Pérou et du Brésil. Ils ne connurent jamais de gouvernement monarchique. L'esprit républicain a été le partage de tous les peuples du Nord, dans l'Ancien Monde et dans le Nouveau. Quite a strong statement that makes me wonder how, if the word crown is just a word that is used by case, or if the word crown has a more metaphorical meaning in the context of the French Revolution and of the Republican discourse. And now I'm just going to conclude with the last object I wanted to show. Christian Feist studied Fayol's collection and was lucky enough to discover an engraving representing the skins, the tan skins, that belonged to Fayol, and some of them were exhibited beyond the mannequin I showed you. I just would like to focus on that one and to show it to you today at the Quai Branly. The first thing to be said is this skin is dated from 1740. So basically, it probably, the collection of Fayol started in 1740. So I don't know how much time has been left between the fact that it has been created and that it entered France, but certainly not so much time. So it's very likely that through his commercial and also informal Navy-based market, he was able to have objects quite quickly and with not too much intermediaries. Probably there is a kind of temporality that is quite fast. That's one thing I wanted to emphasize. The second thing I would like to say is that I would be very curious to know how the skin has been treated when it arrived in France and how it had been perceived. But if you look, and that's my third and also kind of conclusion thing, if you look at the skin a little bit more closely, and again, I'm not an expert, and that's one of the difficulty to do what we are doing today, is that personally I'm not always able to give the right place to the objects that I'm discussing. They are always there, but a little bit like transparent somehow. But nevertheless, if you look at this skin, what you see are people with guns, Native American with guns, which was not their like traditional accessory, to say the least. You have wigwam, their houses. This is, by the way, from the Quapo tribe. Here you have houses for like Western houses. You even have like a church. One of them has a cross. So you have a very strong mixed objects made by people who were living in the Mississippi River, that is to say exactly on a big trade acts from the New France, from Canada to Louisiana. And these are the provenance also of the objects. So I'm not sure how we should integrate the objects. What one can say is that at least this is a very also strong presence, of a sign of colonial presence. That's one way to put it. I would be even tempted to say that it was made for trade purposes, and that it has been very easily and very immediately acquired because it was also made on purpose, and that the iconography is not only reflecting colonial presence, but also kind of interacting with the trade and trying to also, okay, why don't you buy that? You will like it. But that's, of course, a very, it's an open interpretation, and it might be completely wrong. Well, thank you very much for your time.